Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the Smart Cities podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things smart cities. The podcast is the creation of ARC Advisory Group's Smart City practice. ARC advises leading companies, municipalities, and governments on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business and quality of life in their cities. To engage further, please like and share our podcast or reach out directly on Twitter at Smart City Viewpoints or on our website at www.arcweb.com/industries/smart-cities.
Welcome to another episode of the ARC Advisory Group Smart Cities podcast. I'm Eddie Fidler. I'm a transport analyst at ARC. And I'm joined today by Sampo Hietanen. He's the founder and CEO of MaaS Global, also known as the creators of the WIM app. Hey, Sampo.
Hi. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for coming. So maybe you could just start by giving us a little bit about your background up to the creation of MaaS Global, and then we'll get into all of that.
Well, I'm, like said, founder, CEO of MaaS Global, sometimes named the father of this mobility as a service concept, which nowadays sounds really great, but what it really means is I've been the village idiot for roughly about 15 years talking about that, hey, this could really be an opportunity. I'm also a civil engineer and transport planner from my background. What I did before this is within larger and also startups, one way or another within the intelligent transportation. I long time ago did the world's first SMS-based route information systems and similar things that are kind of close to what this is, and hopefully this is the ultimate outcome of how technology will disrupt our beloved mobility.
Okay. So you worked in transport, and then you came up with the concept of mobility as a service. So how did that happen?
Well, like any good idea, it's drunk on a plane.
All right.
Of course, a lot of things led into it. Early 2000 in Finland, everything was about mobile. Nokia was booming, and that's a Finnish company. And all my friends were in Nokia and in mobile sector, and they thought that where I am in transport, this is just the most boring and slow and a small business. And I was actually coming from London, and I had to give a speech because I had been doing these tech and transport things, and I had to give a speech to a lot of people in Finland about how will the disruption look like in mobility with tech. And I started.
And what year was this?
That was 2006.
Okay.
Found those slides, and they're pretty similar to what we do now, which is sometimes things take a bit of time. I kind of started comparing the industry that I've been close also to, which is the mobile industry, and to say, okay, what if a similar disruption would happen in mobility or transport than what happened in the telecom sector coming from the 80s? And it was actually probably was the second or third champagne or whatever, but it was a bit of a revelation that look, it's so similar than if you look at the structures of telecom industry in the 80s and where it was then in 2006. And so, wow, it started being more consumer based. That led to a lot of innovation. The infrastructure is somewhere underlying, but at the same time, people started having, unlike in the 80s, you didn't have your own personal mobile operator or personal telecom operator. You had phones that were plugged to each other from one facility to another.
Right.
And now everybody does. And I said, wait, what if this happened in transport? And that really stuck with me and thought that, wow, this is actually what will at some point happen.
Okay. So what was the roadblock, and why did it take so long for that to become a viable option? What were sort of the technological changes or things like that enabled this?
Well, either it's me not getting my voice heard of. I think this is not a typical invention. It was more or less a forecast of this is what will happen within the industry. I think many would have come to the same conclusion. Back in the 2006, if you want to do an internet disruption within transportation, first you have to have mobile internet that is robust, that can actually do it. And back in the days, it wasn't. We haven't had that, so that people can actually utilize the internet as a disruptor for many years. It's been 5 to 10 years and actually really usable for only some years. So that wasn't there. At the same time, to have, if you really wanted to compete, like where the whole thing has to be, it has to be comparable with car ownership, or there's not really a disruption in it. The parts, the bits and pieces that needed to come together to have that promise of freedom that we need in MaaS for people, they weren't technically capable. So we didn't talk about APIs, we didn't talk about integration. So the background systems were not really compatible. So you couldn't plug together public transport with taxis, with car shares, with city bikes that weren't even there back then. So the supply to really produce MaaS as it is, it wasn't technically there, and it wasn't even physically most of the parts there. It started growing up gradually.
Okay, when you sort of used your crystal ball to see where this might develop in the coming years and how it might all be put together.
Well, the whole thing was more or less. If I think of what was the thing in it is forget about the whole industry, forget about the restrictions, forget about the silos, sectors, and so just focus on, let's assume, just for the fun of it, that people would consume their transportation so that they would have a mobility operator just fixing their connections like a mobile operator. So what would it take? What would it really take? And started looking at, what pieces would be there. And I thought of myself as well. I mean, I'm a transport engineer, and I know that it makes no sense to own a car in a city like Helsinki where public transport is really good. I was thinking, why on earth do I have it? I know this for a fact that I could do all of these trips with taxis and so on and still save money. And I thought, because nobody's there in between fixing that for me, creating it into a service promise. And that was kind of, that has been missing, and that wasn't possible back in the days, because the biggest problem of this is that you need all the bits and pieces before you can really have a credible MaaS happening.
Mm-hmm. So before I ask you about MaaS Global and the WIM app, I realize we actually haven't directly defined mobility as a service for our listeners yet. So if you could do that quickly, then we'll get into the company.
All right. I know that I'm called a father of this, but I wanted to not to have a scientific, because it's become more or less a movement. So scientific definition for me, from user perspective, it's quite simple. It is something that promises you your freedom of mobility, that promises anywhere, anytime on a whim. How that is then produced means that it is a service that combines all needed transportation modes, so that it covers your trips for at least 1 month.
Okay, so stitching together all the different modes such that you would feel comfortable giving up your private vehicle if you live in
that's pretty much it. And for that we need how I tend to say to our staff over here is, if you can find a person that you can guarantee their trips, actually not even for a month, for at least 6 months ahead, that everything that they can come up with, if we have enough supply, if we have enough bits and pieces, then we're good. And why multimodality in this is more or less a tool, because if you think of it, public transport's not going to cover all your trips. Otherwise it would have won already. Even if you add in taxis and car and ride shares, it's not going to cover, because many of the city folks will have their car because they want to get out of the city, want to go to countryside or places like that. So you need access to cars as well. And normally for me, it's at least these three pillars that you need: public transport as a backbone, you need taxi or taxi-like services, whether it's rideshare or ride hail, it doesn't really matter. And you need access to cars to cover the rest. And then you can start. Nowadays, micromobility seems to be more or less also needed in this mix. So if you have that arbitrage of modes, you probably can give people this certainty of being able to get where they love to go.
And so why is it desirable to get people to give up their private vehicles?
Well, there's many aspects to this. One of them is, of course, money. I've argued that asking the question, what would it take for an individual, what would it take for you to give up your car, is going to be economically, the biggest question of the next decades. And the reason is the whole market of mobility, if you look at the consumption of people, it's roughly about $10 trillion market. So it's the second largest consumption for people. 76% of that market is based on an asset that is used about 4% of the time on average, which means that macroeconomically there isn't a bigger opportunity for productivity leaps, and productivity leaps are the ones that actually bring us growth. So the opportunity is undeniable. I mean, if I can find a solution where people are willing to pay as much as they're willing to pay for that car ownership and produce it, let's say more productively, it's a huge opportunity. And that alone is enough of a driver to try to go for that goal. But of course, it's not the only one. We also see that this way that actually T. Ford started and brought to people, which is great. We have our individual freedom to be able to go to places we love, and that opened the world to people. But it's causing too much of societal issues. And that will cause some problems with the whole idea industry. And of course, we have the sustainability goals, whether we want it or not, but they're going to be there. So we'll have to find a solution also for society. But it has to be this triangle. You will not find any solutions for societal goals in transport if you don't fulfill the user's dream of freedom. This is such a profound dream for us to have that freedom of mobility, that unless we find something that's as desirable as owning a car, we don't hit the sustainability goals. And then as third, of course, it needs to make sense as business, because otherwise no one's going to invest in it. I think we found that solution.
Well, it's a really serious challenge. But just to go back for a second, you mentioned that 4% figure that cars are utilized on average, about 4% of the time. And there's different estimates, you can hear 7, 5, 4, but it doesn't really matter that much. The fact is, your very expensive asset is sitting completely idle, just parked, over 90% of the time. There's no industry where their huge capital expenditure is utilized less than 10% of the time. You'd be laughed out of the room, right? It's a joke. And yet we have how many trillions of dollars in assets just sitting there.
But that's one of those things is, we accept, I sometimes think of the whole traffic system as the world's largest factory. And it's humongous, every year, trillions and trillions and trillions, just the running costs of it. And you'd go to a banker and say, hey, do you want to give me a bit of a loan here? I've got this factory that runs with 5. If I really push it, I can push it up to 8% usage. Yes, you'd be laughed out of the room, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But this is, we can as transport people, we can laugh at this and just say, well, wow, people are silly. Or in Tokyo where people, in order for you to buy a car, you have to have a dedicated parking space that's extremely costly, and people still buy those cars. And the funny fact is that over half of those cars is used less than once a week. And we can laugh how silly this is, but that's actually not what I think we should be doing, because this just shows how much people are willing to pay for this freedom, for the idea of freedom, for the capacity of being able to, if I would want to, then I would. I often thought about this, it's an underused asset, but I love to look at the car and say, well, if I would want to go golfing, I could. My wife will never let me, but I could go. So you just look at it and say, okay, but I have that. It's kind of your freedom insurance. And we'll just have to face it. People are willing to pay for that insurance that much. That's fine.
Absolutely.
It actually creates a good opportunity.
Yeah, that means if you can provide them that freedom with even more convenience, maybe at a better price, with fewer environmental impacts, that's one heck of an opportunity. So let's get into how you're trying to meet that challenge. So tell us about MaaS Global and the WIM app.
Well, if we fast forward from when this started, it's been thousands and thousands of people who've actually contributed and done a lot in MaaS. So I cannot claim it's all mine or anything. It's been a lot of those people. At some point within the MaaS creation, there were companies, there were organizations that, yeah, we're all in. We get the whole idea. This is how it's going to be. We want to enable MaaS. And then I started looking at those and said, well, who's going to actually take it all the way to the end user? And I saw a lot of even big companies looking at the ceiling and said, well, we'd like to enable, but that's a tough one. And at some point it made sense to say, okay, fine, let's go. I'll do it. Let's try to found the world's first, mobility operator that actually does MaaS. And that was also done because this is a kind of a strange, phenomena or movement itself. It was done in an open way. So the business plan was done with about 24 different organizations chipping in a bit of money and especially their brains of creating a business plan for this company. That was end of 2014 and 2015. And it started to look like, hey, this really could work. It's a big risk game, but let's go for it. And then some of the early investors said, let's just, okay, we believe enough, show that you can actually put all of those modes together and that it's technically doable. And we started pushing for that early 2016. Have been doing that first in Helsinki, which is our hometown. And saw that, hey, people really get the idea. They really get it extremely well and put most of the modes together and started selling pay-as-you-go and packages. And it started becoming a phenomenon. I mean, we're even in songs now and in books that and then people got the idea that, hey, this could really start comparing to car ownership. And we've been ever since taking it then to a couple of other cities, a couple of other areas, trying to expand and trying to every day fulfill the dream that people have. We're probably at a stage, if you think of cars, is we don't yet even have the T Ford. We're in a pre-T Ford era of creating something similar in it. But it seems that people are really loving the idea and the traction is quite good in those places that we've launched.
So can you walk us through how this actually works, and if I sign up for this, what happens? What do I have access to, and what am I paying?
So you've got different options. The easy option, which most take in the beginning because it's a new concept, is to say, hey, we've got an app that combines at the moment in Helsinki 7 different modes. So you've got all the public transports, car shares, bike shares, micro mobility, car rentals, and what have you, everything that you could ever dream of in just one app. And you never have to hop out of it. All the payments are there. You're not paying any extra. So all the things you love to use are simply in this one app. Just start using €0. That's pretty simple. But of course, it's one of those things where we really think that we can deliver something close to a car is in a monthly subscriptions. And people are more or less, we have to thank the Netflixes and the Spotifys of the world. People are start to be more adaptive to these, that, okay, can I just have a monthly plan where we have a €59 plan that will get you all the public transport you want. It'll give you short distance taxis for a fixed €10, which is over here is really cheap. So that'll give you that wherever you are in a city, you're connected to public transport with a taxi, which is nice. It'll give you unlimited city bikes. It'll start also giving you enough of your micro mobility, but this is a winter area. So it'll start soon when the spring hits this place, because we just cut them in. And most of all, it also guarantees you, the access to your summer houses or wherever you want. So we guarantee that when you need a car, there's a fixed price and we guarantee the availability from different rentals into it. So that's the sort of, let's say, low end package. Then we have an in-between package for those that need the car only for a weekend. So you have all the mobility options you need in a city. And we promise that included in your package every weekend, you can go and pick up a car if you need it because there's so many of them. They have first or second car just for the weekend. So we made them a weekend car. And then there's the unlimited package. This just gives you access to everything with no extra payment. Just go as much as you wish.
So what does the weekend plan cost? Because that sounds like what most people might do living in an urban area.
It's $250, so it's about $300 altogether for you for monthly. And it's actually quite a good deal.
That's a really good deal.
Yeah, it is. And you get to experience every weekend a new car, different one. So if you think of your nice car, I tend to do, I've given over 2,000 speeches about this, and I tend to ask people, so how many of you have a car? And almost all hands are up. And then I ask how many of you have your dream car? And outside of Abu Dhabi, there are not many hands up. But with this, you can at least experience different types of cars all the time.
So that means one weekend I can get a sports car, convertible to leave the city. Another weekend I can get a big family car or a truck if I'm moving a couch or something. And then some weekend. Right.
So why would you settle for one car? You can choose all the time. So this is the whole, let's say, business logic. I can reveal all our business secrets in this. It's a quite classic way, not I would say not the platform way where we just, resell stuff and take our cut in it. There's much bigger in the whole idea of this concept of freedom that we can give to people, is that, hey, look, if we can provide you with this perception of all the beautiful cars that you need, we know that you're not going to be using them as much as you think. And we get the same money as you're willing to pay for your car. Then the fun part of this is what if we decouple the price perception and the price that we get from the user from the actual production costs. So we want to give you fancy cars whenever you need it so that you're willing to pay a lot. But at the same time, if we want to be profitable, the modal arbitrage and shifting the modal split towards cheap, which is also sustainable, is in our interest. So it makes sense for us to reward you every trip you actually walk, bike, microtransit, use public transport, and these, because we all know in transport that the overall kilometers will not change, not dramatically, because you don't have time or you don't have destinations to do more than you did before.
Yeah. So how do you reward people within the app?
Well, we're getting there. We just launched what I would call the world's first. This is on a pilot, so you won't see this on a website yet. What we call a whim ride is where we say that, look, now we've tried enough. We promise service level for you. So we promise you're not going to be delayed if we compare it with a car more than 15 minutes. If the connection is poor with public transport or multimodal, we'll give you a free taxi. Don't worry about it. When you need a car, we'll give you a car. You don't need to worry about these things, but let us fix how you get there and make it convenient for you. You can always upgrade with a bit of extra money. So this is one of those, let's say, new things that we can deliver to people. And this is also where I think the market will be heading more or less. Those people, because of course we take care of all their trips, we can reward and give them points for, you can upgrade your car. You can do luxury things. We can reward you with a coffee if you're green. If you're okay with our choices, we can give you luxuries and extras.
Okay, I see. That's great. And a small part of it is like a gamification, like, oh, you chose the more green option, here's a little bonus reward.
Yeah. And what we've seen also, that if we show that for this route, 74% of people take this route, you're more likely to say, okay, well, that's going to be fine for me as well.
Yeah, there's a social aspect, there's a acceptability aspect. Yeah. Wow.
And we even do it in a way that for this one is, we take the weather into account. So if it's really rainy over there, we're not going to push you into walking. We're just not going to be cheap and give you the taxi. So no worry. And that's going to be free for you. So we take that risk. So
you're really putting service and a guarantee of service above everything else. Because I was going to ask, I mean, okay, giving up my car is a big leap of faith. what if there's no rental available when I really want it? Or what if there's a 20-minute wait for the ride hail because it's rush hour?
That is actually, you hit the point then. And because the added value of MaaS, in comparison to, because we don't do any of that transportation, it is that we have all of these components. We have all of the supplies. So we have, all of the different taxi vendors here. We have all of them. We need to be credible towards you. And for example, we had to postpone our launch. We had a trial of some 100 people with a subscription, and many of them gave up their cars. And there was a dad who gave up his car, and he called me on a Sunday, and he said, look, I ordered a taxi from Wim, and it didn't come. And it turned out that the taxi took someone else, and just the taxi didn't come. And he said, look, guys, this cannot, of course, happen. I said, of course. Next Sunday, someone picked it up too far, so he had to wait this 20 minutes. And we really have to get our heads around, so how do we figure this out? We cannot, I mean, if you just sell one ride at a time, you can just say, well, you didn't pay, sorry, but this is how it is. And everything else outside the car is kind of with the attitude that catch me if you can. Here's my timetable, my availability. If I'm not there, sorry, but I'm not there. So our job really needs to be that it's those 5% that count. When you really need it, we need to make sure that, if public transport's not there, microtransit is. If that's not there, we'll have taxis. If those are there, we're going to give you a car. And these are the moments where we make our mark. It's really the service promise. This is what people like in their cars, because it's extremely loyal. I mean, even if it sits there, but you know where it's sitting, so you can always pick it up and take it.
Yeah, you're guaranteed. And you're spot on with the 5%. I mean, I'm just imagining someone making the switch, and you have a few of those edge cases in a row, or a few weeks in a row where it fails you, where it really inconveniences you, and that might really shift your perception.
Yeah, that's what I have a nice story. A long time ago, I was in Ireland, in Dublin. There's this guy. There's a lot of transport engineers in the room, and there's this really wise guy over there. I like him, and he said, "Look, yeah, well, this MaaS thing, I have it already because I commute to Dublin, and all my commute and whatever I need within Dublin, it's embedded in my annual card, and it only costs me 700 euros. So how'd you like that? That's my MaaS." And I said, yeah, that can be your MaaS if that takes care of it. But I just asked all of you how many of you have a car, and you raised your hand. So you have a car? Yeah, I have a car. So you're a professional. What would you think? What would you estimate that? What's the percentage of trips you do with your car? And he calculated and said, "Oh, it's somewhere between 5 and 10% of all my trips." They're fine. Okay. Then, what do you think that the cost of that car is? And since he was professional, he could say it's roughly about 12,000 euros a year. So I said, look, you see, for the 90 to 95% of your trips, you spend 700 euros. And for the remaining 5 to 10%, you spend 12,000 euros. Do you see where the business case is? And we can also see that. I mean, if let's say the package that has micromobility and public transport and such, if we put price and if it fluctuates with about 1 or 2%, we see that on the demand. And then we add in weekends of a car, and that's 60 euros. So if we add in weekends of a car, and 250 sounds really cheap for you. So the price perception is still with having the access to a car or cars.
Yeah, that's powerful. It's really powerful. And I'm particularly curious about the sort of human factors of this, and the public reception and adoption. So can you speak more about what you've learned from your Helsinki deployment? And we'll get into some of your other deployments after that. But what has been the feedback from people? You mentioned 1 or 2 negative pieces of feedback, which taught you a lot. But tell me more about that.
Well, the hard part of this is that people really get the concept. I mean, they realize, oh my God, yeah, I could have just like a Netflix of transportation. This is awesome. The problem is that the Netflixes and Spotifys, they exist there. So we're kind of in a situation oftentimes where it's a chicken and egg thing. So we need to prove to our partners that, look, it makes sense to integrate into us. So we kind of have to have the first customers with the Netflix with only 3 movies in it. And that's a tough one because they really get the idea that having everything within. And it takes time to negotiate with all the different TSPs, transportation service providers, integrate them technically, have all of the bits and pieces. And you have to understand that public transport, taxis, car shares, micromobility, they were never meant to really function together. So they're not designed for that. Someone said it nicely that it's our job that, we have this puzzle of bits and pieces that are not actually from the same puzzle. And it's our job to iron out all the differences and make that into a beautiful, beautiful picture. So it is hard to fulfill those expectations from people with pieces that are not designed to work together. It's extremely hard. And the hardest part of all this is, we need to be best towards really good towards the end user, but we need to work. We have no independence with our product because that's done by third-party service providers, and they're all bigger than we are. So finding this common ground of old enemies in different modes and still working together and finding common ground, it takes time and it takes a lot of effort. So trying to fit these together is definitely hard, and it means a lot of disappointments because, of course, take for example that we take the car part. Everybody would expect that, okay, if it's a service, of course, why wouldn't the car come to me? But if we don't have any services like that available, it's hard. They definitely don't expect that if they're a WIM user, they've used every mode there. And then they go to a car rental counter and there's a summer trainee over there that asks all these questions that shouldn't be there. So it's the physical layer combined with the digital that really there's gazillions of elements. If the taxi drivers are not used to these kinds of apps, it's a totally new ball game. So there's thousands and thousands of problems there, but there's also thousands and thousands of happy people who love this. And I was just in a Facebook conversation last night. One of our loyal customers had a trouble with a car rental, and there was some sort of a issue with the car. And when returning, and they were saying that we need to fix this and it costs thousands. And he was saying that, look, this is impossible. How could he have known? And he felt that he didn't do it, of course. And it's a tough one. But gladly he said that I'm just so happy it went through WIM because, with WIM, there's a guaranteed. So we've negotiated such that he's only covering up to 500 of it. And he understood where we stand. And I was saying that, look, what we're trying to do is try to come up with an insurance that covers whatever mode you use, whatever car you use, so that you know your liabilities immediately. And it's these conversations, it's these troubles that actually keep me going as well, because it's the stress points of transport that we need to concentrate and fix them one at a time.
Okay, so you're running into issues ironing together the different mobility service providers, the physical layers with your aggregation layer, and some of those creases in between. But it sounds like in Helsinki, at least, you have managed to patch together, you mentioned 7 different modes, and your early customers are really enjoying this. So that's right?
Well, they are. Of course, the whole company, we all know our targets are way beyond, and we know already at least 10 different next steps that we'd love to do and put into place. And there's a lot of things we need to fix in here. And of course, everything, well, this is more a Finnish mentality. Everything could be better as well. But yes, it's these stories that how people love. And we just got a while ago, we got a 5-star rating in App Store. And there's this guy who said, and we don't think that the car delivery is yet where it should be from service perspective. But he said that he's been driving the high end of BMWs and Daimlers all his life for 40 years. And he wanted to try something different and tried WIM and said that it's exceeded every expectation he had already. And that's a wow moment.
So you're seeing real people give up their private vehicles and not regret
Yes.
it. That's the crux of it.
And it's a second part. I also got a mail from this single mom living in the suburbs of Helsinki who said that, look, you guys saved my life because she thought that she'd have to move into a smaller flat that's not in the nature and so downtown because she lives so far from the train station. But because of our convenient ways of mixing these modes, she's been able to stay where she loves to be near the nature, and because we made this possible so she can fix the whole logistics of her day. And that it's those things that we need to live for.
How many users do you have in Helsinki?
We have somewhat over 100,000, which is, I would say, quite okay. We haven't pushed in a huge millions and millions into marketing.
Wow.
This is roughly about
what is
600,000. Helsinki itself has about 600,000, and the surroundings will have a bit over 1 million. So it's a fair bit.
Wow. And do you have an idea of how many of those are, I want to say regular users, but I guess folks that have replaced their private vehicle with this service at this point?
Well, we live for the users, so we try to bug them as little as possible, so we don't do things where they have to say this and that. We get a lot of feedback of people skipping their second car and even their first cars, but we don't have exact numbers on that one.
Okay. Can you give us an idea of the volume of travel? How many rides or how many kilometers traveled a year?
We've done about 8 million rides at the moment. So it's been quite nicely going up. Of course, with all of this, you have to understand that it's early days. Our goals for, replacing a car globally and being as good as that will not happen in a year or two. But at least it shows that we're on the right path. Yeah, 8 million is a good start.
Wow, that's a great start. So that's in Helsinki. I understand you're expanding in Europe.
Yes, we've tried and started in Birmingham, which is in the UK,
Yeah.
right above London over there, to see how that fits. Still more or less in a pilot phase, and the components are somewhat to be found. We went then to Belgium, which is really also congested, a bit like Boston in that sense, especially in Antwerp area and the Flanders that goes around it.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually quite a nice area, and the policy over there is really welcoming. And then also we're in Vienna. We're technically also live now in Singapore and Japan, but it's more or less in a technical pilot phase at the moment.
Okay, is Vienna also
Holland as well? No, Vienna.
Okay.
We're already starting. Let's say the first phase of sales is starting over there.
Okay, great. And you mentioned some of the policies around Antwerp are favorable to this. What does that mean?
Well, they really politically said that, look, guys, we want this. We're so congested. We want these MaaS operators here. And we understand that if we want to compete against cars, it's not going to be us providing that service. We're not cut out for that. But we want to make sure that you have all the ingredients you need to create a MaaS, which means that they made policies such that whether you're a ride share, public transport, ride hail, car share, scooters, bikes, whatever, you need to have a technical API. You need to allow yourself to be aggregated. And they haven't just imposed it, but they have also helped a lot in it. So they put the money where their mouth is. They've helped all of those different transportation providers. But I'll tell another example of them. They've even done it in a way that if you bring your license plate to the mayor's office, you don't have to physically do that. They're technically good enough. If you give up your car and you give up the license plate, they will compensate roughly about $50 per month for your MaaS subscription, and they'll do that for duration of up to 2 years. This is amazing. I mean, this is exactly kind of policies where you create markets and make things happen. And actually, we have competition over there, which is good. There are a number of local players that thought that, okay, this is worth doing an investment, and they're creating the supply, which is growing all the time in Antwerp, and they make it easy for the likes of us to invest and start working over there.
That's incredible. That's great.
Yeah,
And
it is.
That's at the city level.
That's at the
policy.
city level.
Okay.
Yeah. Cities have a lot of power in this.
Yeah, clearly. And they have a lot to lose from congestion and pollution. So ARC we're a global company, but we are headquartered here in Boston, in the U.S. And you might know that Boston is notorious for some of the worst traffic congestion in the country. So I have to ask, do you have plans to expand to North America, to Asia?
We are now concentrating more in Europe and Asia. We had plans to come to North America and US. We've even looked at Boston quite thoroughly and analyzed. It would be actually a really great city to get started with MaaS.
Absolutely.
The thing is, and this is the hardest part of MaaS, which is sometimes even strange. I talk to normal people and everybody gets it and they say, why isn't it here yet? That shouldn't be rocket science. But it is about the hardest part of this is, look, no one, and I really mean no company alone, will have enough credible supply to create MaaS for even one person. And it's these, well, you could call them thoughts, negotiations, someone might say even power games of not allowing to be integrated. That stopped us from, and why US doesn't have MaaS implementations, even though many of those cities would actually be really ideal, including Boston, for this concept. It's finding that business model where, there are a couple of things that I would say: ask what the end user wants, not what your core business wants, and what the industry wants. And as a user, I can ask, so would you like to have in Boston access with a simple subscription to all the mobility within Boston and even further? You probably would say yes, I assume.
Oh, most definitely.
Then the second one is hardest. Would you like to, so you'd like to get access to everything. So secondly is, would you like to have a choice of where you get that access from?
I feel like that's more of a guarantee issue.
Yeah.
I think it's less important that it's Uber or Lyft that picks me up. It's more that it can be there in 5 minutes.
Exactly. You probably want that, the Ubers and Lyft and public transport and micromobilities, all of them, that you have access to everything, because that gives you that guarantee. Only then can actually an operator like us, give you a guarantee that, hey, you're covered. And car has to be a relevant part of this. So you need all those modes. And then at the same time, that's oftentimes people get it. Yes, this is what people want. I alone will do it because I hold the keys to a relevant chunk of this one mode. So I alone will control the whole combination and aggregation. But people don't want that. People actually want to even choose. I mean, we never think that the WIM app will be that service in any given city will be the only ones. And we also understand that that means we're going to use the same buses and taxis and ride hails and micromobilities as our competitor. And that's just the way it has to be. Because also the third question is important. You probably say, what if I told you instead of a car, I'll give you access to every single bus, taxi, train, car share, bike share, micromobility within the whole US. It's all yours. You can hop on the New York Metro, the Boston at the same time. You can do any of those ride shares, and you can have a car from any car rental and any car share. Would you give up your car for that?
Yeah, that sounds like the Holy Grail.
Yeah, it sounds like impossible, but actually it isn't. It's technically really doable. We can do it in a year. It just means that, okay, let's get our heads around what the people would want. That's the hardest part of this.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're having issues. It sounds like every mobility service provider is trying to build their own fiefdom around their capabilities and their customers. And this doesn't happen unless you break those down. So there's some opposing forces here.
It's understandable. I mean, if people read too many books about platform economy and somehow think that you need to control this ecosystem. which has been in, let's say, smaller markets, that's the winning formula. Mobility is way too big for anyone to control. It'll not happen. The sooner you get over it, the better it is. So the disruption for these bigger industries like living and transport and energy and food, they will not happen in a way that one to control them all. That's not it. So we should talk more about API economy, which means that there's an ecosystem that not actually mobility ecosystem is mobility ecosystem. It's not controlled by one platform or company. There's a lot of APIs, a lot of plugins, but no central one who controls it all. Otherwise, you just don't get it done. It's too big for that.
It's just too big. Wow. Yeah, that's sort of the scale of the issue, the scale of the industry that we're approaching.
We can. The telecom industry uses ARPU, average revenue per user. For over the whole population, it's somewhere between $300 and $500 a month for this. Telecom for the whole of that is about $30 a month. So we're 10 times bigger than the whole telecom industry. And that's big. I mean, all the apples and everything, but we're talking about 10 times bigger phenomena. If you think of those platforms that everybody looks at, where, you sell data and do these things, do you know the ARPU? I think the biggest average revenue per user, it lies with Facebook. And if I remember correctly, it's somewhere around 20 cents a month. So come on, we're talking about a totally new ball game. It's not going to be controlled by one.
This is astronomical.
Yes.
It's a complete different order of magnitude. So, and then it almost bleeds over, into a broader idea here of, well, what are cities for? Who are they for? This touches the complete streets or reclaim the streets movement and set of ideas too. So this expands far beyond just providing one particular scooter service or any one thing.
Of course it does. And the idea, and this is where it gets really tricky, is that, cities and infrastructure was built around the whole idea of people owning cars. And that's why cities are based. And when we look at any transport structure, we think about corridors. And now if we assume, just for the fun of it, let's assume that the demand of how people consume their transportation will change dramatically. It means that it's no longer ownership based and asset based that way. But people will have services, which means that it will definitely, will be multimodal, which means an interchange. And that means that the logic of all city planning and transport planning will no longer be based on corridors, but more on hubs. And that changes actually quite a lot on how we think of this.
So it seems like a few different things have to change almost at the same time, simultaneously, to make this happen.
Well, that's the magnitude of all things. And let's not underestimate how huge thing starting from cars and especially T4 brought to the world. It changed the whole concept of how we think of freedom, how we think of moving, how we think of cities, how we think of things between cities and so on. So if we think that this is just a minor thing of disrupting mobility, well, think again.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. And we were all born into the car-centric universe.
Exactly.
We take it absolutely as a given, absolutely for granted. That's how our cities are laid out. Streets, street parking garages. It's all about the cars. So all of that is probably going to change if the demand side changes. But there's a timescale issue here, right? Any investment that a government makes on infrastructure is meant to last decades, an entire generation. So it's not a simple issue.
Yeah. No, it's not, but it's, I've had a lot of time, of course, to think about this from some years ago, but it's the actions that count. And we can do the early victories and just keep on showing, because the whole concept of MaaS, it's always going to be a chicken and egg thing. The more you show, the more things will happen. I have to applaud actually the guys in car industry as well. When you think of it, at some point there were maybe 5% of the population that had cars. And probably at a time when this Futurama was done 32, it wasn't that everybody had a car, but we somehow was bought the vision. It was a go to the moon kind of thing. That, okay, hey, if everybody had a car, how liberated would we feel? And it became like a thing. And I get it. It's that idea of having individual freedom that's just so appealing. And it really changed everything. And we have to get to the same level. We have to have a dream, a big enough dream. How I kind of think of it is because, at that time of T-Ford, it opened the world to people, but the world was smaller back then. The car will give you freedom, but the radius is X hours of driving that you're willing to do. That's where it stops. So what I can do instead is say, how about the whole world instead? And if that's kind of a dream big enough, that wave will hopefully allow a lot of things to change.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. And it does tell you a little bit about the tactics necessary here, where at first no one had cars, but you had that World Fair and the Futurama thing that you alluded to, and the dream was there, right? They won hearts and minds, and the infrastructure and tech and the market followed that. So it sounds like you're trying to replicate that somewhat by demonstrating this and getting believers on your side.
Well, you have to enjoy the small moments when you're trying to save the world. And one of those was in New York, and it was the Smithsonian Design Museum over there. It was about the future of transport. On the other side of the room, they had the original Futurama design. On the other side of the room, they had Wim. And being there was kind of those moments, for a small guy from Finland. And at the same time, the pace and the possibility of the world, which is, it overwhelms me all the time. I know when this concept was born and how it was born and how it looked like 10 years ago. And things can come out. And I know for sure that there never was an evil conspiracy behind MaaS or any kind of tactics or any media or lobbying. It's just people getting excited about, yes, this is how it's going. I want to do something about it. And it's amazing how much power that can have. I mean, here I am from Finland, where it's far up in the north. Nobody normally even knows what it is and where it is. And a guy from here is making a podcast to Boston about this concept, it's amazing. It's amazing to see the power of people getting excited.
Yeah, we cover a lot of markets here at ARC, and this is one that's absolutely struck me, where there's almost a completely organic movement, a very organic interest in this whole space, and it's building in that way, which suggests it's pretty powerful, and it speaks to the need.
Yeah. So it definitely is.
Mm-hmm. So I think we could close with that. Sampo, we really appreciate your time and what you've done with this industry, and we wish you well, and hopefully we'll speak again soon. You could come back and update us.
All right. Hey, thanks. It was a great interview.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the Smart Cities podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things smart cities. The podcast is the creation of ARC Advisory Group's Smart City practice. ARC advises leading companies, municipalities, and governments on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business and quality of life in their cities. To engage further, please like and share our podcast or reach out directly on Twitter at Smart City Viewpoints or on our website at www.arcweb.com/industries/smart-cities.